main page, and then in the law notes we'll go to foundation, and in the foundation we have here people or citizen, which one are you? Okay, so we'll click on that, and this comes up with an article about the difference between people and citizens. Now basically what it is that when this country was, we have a little feedback on this, I think, just a little too much feedback on the mic, but when this country was founded, it originally was a bunch of revolutionaries broke away from England, and the king canceled all the charters so that there basically was no connection between. All right, that volume, you're adjusting the volume, Dennis? Okay. So basically there was no connection between the king, Great Britain, and ourselves anymore. As far as the king was concerned, he still owned everything. As far as we were concerned, he didn't. But there was no legal connection because the king revoked all the charters. And we made our own statement of independence. And at that point, there was no government, not legally, so everybody became a sovereign. Okay? Now, there were some of us sovereigns who formed organizations that were formerly called colonies and now were called states. Okay, and so these organizations got together, and they created this thing called the Confederation. Okay, and so they had the Articles of Confederation, and that worked for a while, but then it really didn't work. So they sent, each of the states sent their emissaries to a big meeting, and at that big meeting, the emissaries basically went off on a tangent and said, well, what we really need to do is just rewrite this whole thing. But this time, instead of the states doing it, they did it as people. Still sovereign. And the theory they had was the Lockean theory, that Locke was the philosopher, as opposed to Hobbes. Hobbes said power comes from the top and goes down to the people. Locke says power comes from the people and goes up to the top, to the government. And so our basic philosophy is Lockean. And in the preamble, they basically said, we the people ordain and establish this Constitution for you guys over there called the United States of America. So we're still acting with our sovereign powers. And then what we said, if you read through the Constitution, toward the end it says that, okay, here's the game plan. And if 9 of you organizations that call yourselves states will come on board with this plan, then it's a go. If we don't get 9 of you at least, then it's a no-go. But the people put it together, proposed it, and said, okay, now you can volunteer into it, to the states. The states did volunteer into it, and so now we had the United States of America, and so they're contracted in. And there's actually court cases that recognize that the United States of America, as is presently constituted, is by authority of the people and not by authority by the states, and the states are contracted in. And the people are still sovereign because it says we ordain and establish this Constitution for whom? For the United States of America. Okay, well, when we ordain and establish, what does ordain and establish mean? Well, the ordain part means to authorize, to make law. The establish means we actually put it on paper so you can read it, publish it, spread it around, create it. So we ordain and establish. Now, there's nothing about those two words, ordain and establish, that takes away from our sovereignty. We're still kings. Okay? Well, this is very painful to government. They couldn't stand that. So they had to figure a way. And don't underestimate these people. These people think in 100-year terms or 200-year terms. Okay? And one of the first signs of it, well, there are many first signs, of course, but one of the major first signs was when they took over the first mandatory public school. You see, you have to understand that when the United States broke away from England, we were a mature society. We were not just a bunch of colonists running around trying to figure out what to do. We had education. We had knowledge here. We had people who were experienced and educated in history and knew stuff. Do you realize that in 1776, Harvard University, which was owned by a church, was over 100 years old? Okay? So we're not just a bunch of bushmen running around in the forest wondering what to do. And we put together a really excellent system. In fact, the more I study it, the more I see, boy, these guys were sharp. But no matter how sharp they were, they did miss one point. At that time, and for many decades, all education pretty much was private. The parents got together, hired the teachers for their kids. They had local control. You've heard of local control for schools. Well, they really had real local control. They had real homeschooling. And so in the 1850s, the government, I don't remember which city it was, but the government brought out the military and escorted the first children for the first mandatory public school. And that was the beginning of the public school system in the mandatory sense. There were public schools, but that was the mandatory public school. Now, why was it so important? Well, they couldn't change the Constitution. There was too much resistance there, so they changed the education system. From the 1850s to the 1950s, they stripped out the subject of civics and replaced it with a new subject that you're all pretty much familiar with. It's called American government. You ever take that in school? American government? Social studies? Okay? They took out civics. What is civics? Civics, if you look in the dictionary, at least the one I looked in, civics is the study of personal rights. It's that branch of political philosophy dealing with personal rights. Well, once the government gained control of the curriculum, they stripped out the things that were troublesome to government. Things like your rights. So here we are again, okay, all of us basically are studying civics. That's really what we're doing when we go to court. Now, so like I said, from the 1850s to the 1950s, they stripped it out. That subject is there, phased it out little by little. So from generation to generation, there might have been a deterioration, but it was not that visible what they were up to. But if you compare 100 years ago with today, or 150 years ago, you can see the difference. Okay? Now, but that still wasn't enough because the people are sovereign. And some people understood it, what it was. So they had the Civil War, and supposedly it was over the issue of slavery. I can tell you the official reason for the Civil War. The official reason I've actually seen with my own eyes. I saw the document that was signed by President Lincoln. It was on display at the Huntington Library. That document is privately owned, and they had it on display, on loan to the library. And I happened to go there when I heard that they had this document. I wanted to see it, so I can say I have actually seen it myself. You know what it was? Lincoln attacked the southern states for failure to pay their taxes. That's the legal reason. Okay? Because you see, the federal government had to live off of the states. There was no income tax. So, and of course that's pretty bad too, because you remember, money is power. And the states were able to keep the federal government under control pretty much because they were the source of the money. And the federal government got quite desperate when a source of their income was going to try and leave. So they used force to keep them in the Union. So anyhow, they had that little fiasco called the Civil War. And in 1868, they, again using slavery as the excuse, they then came through with some amendments which supposedly helped to free the slaves. One of them, of course, was the 13th Amendment. I'm not talking about the lost 13th Amendment, but I'm talking about the other 13th Amendment, where the phrase where I guess the slaves were freed up. But the real thing was the 14th Amendment. Because the 14th Amendment is the one that defined the term citizen of the United States. Now, you have two terms in the Constitution that are defined constitutionally. One of them is treason, and the other is citizen of the United States. There are no other definitions in the Constitution. And the citizen of the United States, well, what is it? What does it take to be a citizen of the United States? Well, you have to qualify. Okay? What are the two qualifications? That's what it names, two qualifications in order to be a citizen. The first qualification is you have to either be born here or naturalized. The second qualification to be a citizen of the United States is you have to be subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. See that word? Subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. That is the second requirement for being a citizen. You understand? Subject. The people are sovereign. They're not subject to anybody. At most, if you're one of the people of the United States, you are subject to your fellow sovereigns in the form of grand jury indictment and petite jury 100% conviction. Okay? That's a trial by the people, not a trial by the government. When a government does a prosecution, they prosecute on information. They appear with information before the magistrate. The magistrate functions like a one-man grand jury, decides whether or not there's a case there, and of course, as we all know, he usually rubber stamps it to tell him go ahead and do the prosecution. And then you have the next trial, which they say you can have a jury if you're talking criminal proceedings, but in fact those juries are advisory juries. Okay? About the only place I know where common law might be really used is in an actual murder trial, because they actually go and get an indictment. And in other words, to a grand jury, they don't do it on information, they do it on indictment. But then that's questionable too, because none of the grand juries in the United States have 25 people. It's always fewer than 25. That's a whole subject area of discussion right there. But basically, they typically have 21 or 23, but not 25. If they had 25, it'd be a real grand jury. So it's a legislated, statutorily defined grand jury rather than a common law grand jury. If you want a common law grand jury, you get 25. I've kind of played with the thought of what if we got 25 of us together and officially notified the government that we are a grand jury and then started investigating. What if we went to the court administrator and said, how about giving us a room we can meet in? But again, that's another topic. But if you do want to know about grand juries, read Article 61 of the Magna Carta, which is on this disc. And you'll see the entire procedure for setting up a grand jury and what the powers of a grand jury are. Anyhow, so the citizens are defined as people who are born or naturalized and subject to the jurisdiction. So if you're subject to the jurisdiction, now you're no longer sovereign. Okay, if you're subject to the jurisdiction, you have a master. After all, to be subject, you got to have somebody who's subjecting you. Okay? So, the preamble, let's look at this a little closer. Okay? We start off here. I kind of gave you the overview. Now here's the detail. The preamble does not specifically define the word people. Nevertheless, the definition becomes apparent in the context of the other words and prior history. And so, prior to the United States, before the United States existed, there was no legal government. A group of representatives acting in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies declared the independence of the colonies from the British Crown and the state of Great Britain. And so from the beginning, in the 1776 Declaration of Independence, the people were acknowledged as a source of authority. That is, the sovereignty which authorized the Declaration of Independence. By the way, President Lincoln considered the Declaration of Independence as our first Constitution. He said there were 3 constitutions, and that was the first one. And some people are actually incorporating that in their legal papers, saying that that's the foundation, that defines our system. Okay, so next came the Articles of Confederation in 1778. Then 1787, the people themselves came forth to ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. And that gave us a preamble. So let's analyze that preamble, because I want you to get a picture of this sovereignty. Okay, here's the full statement. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure. So you have a laundry list of tasks. By the way, everything you see there, everything in there is an element of a trust. You've heard of trust? Okay. We have the people are the trustors. The trustees are the United States of America. The purpose of the trust, to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, etc. Okay? And the beneficiaries of the trust are ourselves and our posterity. Okay? So, the United States of America is not a country. It's the states that are independent countries. It's the United States, that's a trust, a corporation. How can you tell it's a corporation? It's real easy. All corporations have presidents and vice presidents and secretaries and treasurers. Okay? States have governors. Or countries have governors. Okay, so anyway, we go into the structure of this thing. Here it is. The trustor, we the people. The venue of the United States. The purpose, in order to form a more perfect union, etc. And get the blessings of liberty. The beneficiary, to ourselves and our posterity. The enabling action, do ordain. We declare the law. Enabling action number 2, and establish, bring into existence. What? This Constitution. Those are the Articles of Incorporation for the trust. You know, all corporations are trusts. Are you aware of that? Yeah. You know, just as a side note, I've always advocated, if you want to set up a trust, set up a corporation for profit or set up a non-profit corporation. To me, that's the best trust. Why is it the best trust? Because that's the trust that all the rich people use to protect their assets, their income, and get tax exemptions and the whole bit. And so, the IRS is not going to attack that trust. If you did everything, did everything according to that trust, you're basically pretty much immune from attack if you follow all the little rules. And the rules are designed so that the government gets no money. Okay? You know, it's not an accident that they're set up that way. You can set up other trusts, and other trusts are legally correct and everything, but what did you do? You ran up a red flag you ran up the Jolly Roger on the flagpole, right? You said, come get me. So you can be right, and you can get a nice fight on your hands, maybe. I don't know. But just as a little aside, I like corporations and non-profit corporations because of that. And I'm not taking away from the value of the other kinds of trusts. But if you really want to beat the system, that's how they all do it. That's why rich people don't pay taxes. What was it that Leona Helmsley, that's right. She says only little people pay taxes. Okay. So anyway, so the trustee is the United States of America. And so here's the analysis here on this disc where it goes into that. It defines the context and in which the remainder of the Constitution must be interpreted. Most of it is self-explanatory. Here's an explanation that points to popular sovereignty. So but basically the preamble, you see, when you talk to an attorney and you say, well, what's the significance of the preamble in the Constitution? And the answer I've always gotten was, well, there's really no legal significance, but it just kind of is an introductory kind of thing, you know. But it just kind of is an introductory kind of thing, you know. But that's not part of the Constitution. And he's right from his point of view, because the attorneys all deal with statutory law. They're all inside that shadow of the Constitution. Whereas the preamble basically sets the foundation for what this is all about. We, the people, ordain and establish this system for you guys over there. This is how we want you guys to run this for our benefit. These are your operating rules. That Constitution was not written for you and me, it was written for them. And it doesn't apply to you and me. We're in our sovereign capacity. We can dump that anytime we want. Okay? So, and how do we dump it? Well, my favorite way to dump it is to go to court, you know, and make them toe the line in court. You know? I mean, that's what I did one time. Went to court, and the judge issued an order. I issued an order vacating his order. Later on, he forgot, and he issued a second order. So then I issued an order that vacated that second order. And I fined him for contempt of court. Okay? And by the way, on this CD that you've got, that case appears. Okay? And so you can look at it. It has, you look at the contempt ruling, and you get the entire foundation of how that relationship between you and that judge is defined, and why it is that you outrank that judge. Okay, it's all there. So, anyway, the preamble sets the whole character of the game. And if you, in your sovereign capacity, choose not to play the game, that's your right. Okay? Because, just think of it this way. If you owned a company and you hired somebody and you said to that somebody, look, you're going to be the manager. I'm going to let you run the company and I'm going to be the janitor. Now, when you take the job of janitor and you're cleaning up around the company that you own, is there anything to stop you from taking over the manager's job anytime you want to? Not at all. And so that's the relationship we have with the judge. When you own the country, then he works for you. And if he's not doing the job, you're entitled to order him right out. Okay? So, all right, after the Declaration of Independence, but before the ordainment and establishment of the Constitution, the people of the United States pretty much handled their own affairs using the common law. Now, everybody was educated in the common law, so that's what made it possible. Jefferson said that, to this effect, I'm paraphrasing, but he said that ignorance and liberty cannot coexist. So the United States of America, or before it became the United States of America, when it was just colonies, was the biggest buyer of legal marriage. That's the nobility. Okay? Citizens are not peers. In fact, there was a case, I think I told you about this last time I was here. A guy down in San Diego I heard about. He demanded a jury of his peers, and he knew what a peer was. The judge couldn't find one. Could not find a single potential member of the jury who would admit that he wasn't a citizen. Okay? That he was a member of the sovereignty. And so finally he sent the sheriff out to see if he could find some peers. Couldn't find them, had to report back. Eventually they had to dismiss the case because they couldn't assemble a proper jury. I wish I met that guy. I wish I knew who he was. I'd like to talk to him more. I just got that secondhand. But I've never forgot that story. So, all right, so here's a court case in Lansing versus Smith that occurred in New York. And by the way, on these sites here, you'll see where it says Lansing v. Smith for Wend, okay, short for Wendell. Basically, page 9, volume 4, page 9. What that is that back in the early days of our court system, the court records were the personal records of the clerk. And a lot of these records got lost because, you know, they were personal records, they were in their homes and things happened. So when they cite those old cases, they cite the clerk's name. And so it's volume 4 of Wendell, page 9. And the year was 1829. Okay? And so, anyway, in that case, the court said, the people of this state, as the successors of its former sovereign, are entitled to all the rights which formerly belonged to the king by his prerogative. By his prerogative. What are your rights? Well, it's whatever you say they are. Okay? Your only limitation on your rights is that you may not impose your will on another sovereign. Okay? You can contract with another sovereign, but you can't impose your will on them. And so your rights stop where mine start. Okay? There's an invisible border between us that we have to respect. Of course, if we get into a dispute about it, that's what the court process is all about. But basically, this is the important concept, that all the rights which formerly belonged to the king by his prerogative, he determined. You want to know what the king's rights were or are? He'll tell you. You just ask him. Those are my rights. So if I want to drive down the left side of the street, that's my prerogative. I call that a right. But you see, we have, at least you've heard it advertised, we have this principle that you're innocent until proven guilty. And what's the basis? The basis is, did you harm someone? Okay? If you have no corpus delicti, if there's no body of the crime, then there's no basis for prosecution. Okay? You're presumed innocent. If nothing went wrong, you must have had things under control. But if you screw up, then the penalties are very severe. Did you know that, for example, first-time burglary is what, 30 days? Isn't that what it is? Under the statutory laws, the codes, penal code? Something like that, 30 days for a minor burglary. Under common law, it's a death penalty. If you've ever been burglarized, I'm sure you felt like killing whoever did it. You know? So the statutes are rather kind to criminals. But the thing is that the rights are by your prerogative, whatever they are. Now let's compare that with citizenship. A citizen is subject. Okay? Here we are. We get into the definition of citizen in the United States. It's the 14th Amendment. Before ratification of the Amendment 14, there was no legal definition of the term citizen of the United States. The term was used, but only generally. It was not a legal term, it was a conversational term. Okay? After the Civil War, the slaves were freed, but there was no legal basis to recognize them as having any rights. Amendment 14 partially solved that problem. If you're a citizen of the United States, which all the slaves were, then this constitutional amendment imposed on the states the requirement that they must accept that person as a citizen of that state if he's living there. Okay? That's how because there was no legal basis from the state's point of view for recognizing these slaves that were now freed, because they came from out of the country. Even if they were born here, they were from out of the country. So to get them accepted. But look what happened. What happened was that the slaves were privately owned, and they got released into what amounted to public ownership. Right? Citizens of the United States, they're subject to the jurisdiction. They are now publicly owned. But what a neat deal. Isn't it nice to have slaves for whom you are not responsible to feed them? You're not responsible to clothe them. You're not responsible to house them. And yet you have control of them. Show me why I'm wrong. Okay? You have 30 days in which to file a paper saying why this order I just issued is incorrect. I have never had a single opposition paper filed, ever. Interesting. I've had them dance around my orders, you know. So, anyway, So the thing is you can pick and choose when and where you want to be a sovereign. Okay, well, see, citizens are subjects, and citizens have privileges granted by the master. They have no rights. If you're going to be a citizen, if you're a 100% citizen, then you are 100% subject. If you're a part-time citizen, then you can step out of that role anytime you want. Now, what's the difference between people and citizens, like in my case? The difference is education, knowledge. If you say you are one of the people, you're one of the people. The burden is on them to prove you're not. You see, when you accuse yourself, you don't have to prove it to anybody. It's when somebody else accuses you that they have to come up with the proof. See, any claim you make about yourself, you don't have to prove it. The burden's on the other side. Whoever makes a claim against you, they have to prove whatever their claim is. So I claim I'm a sovereign. What is a sovereign? What are people? To tell you the truth, I can't tell you what a people is. I know I'm one of them, but I can't tell you what people are or is. By the way, that word is correct, either singular or plural. So what is a people? Well, like I said, I can't tell you, but I'll tell you what I can tell you. I know the relationship between people and government. We the people, whoever, whatever we are, ordain and establish it for you guys, and so you're under us. So if anybody asks me says you're a people, what's that? I'll say, I don't know. But I know I'm above you, the government. Okay, because they defined our relationship without defining what we were. Yes, sir.
How does all this apply to foreign immigrants? Immigrants from outside the United States of America.
Well, that's an interesting question. I've never really researched that. But I suspect that an immigrant who comes here, if he's naturalized and subject to the laws, subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, then that person would be a publicly owned slave, right? A citizen. Now, can you break that yoke? Because what they do is they contract you in. When you take the oath of allegiance in order to acquire citizenship, I think they tell you, do you promise to obey all the laws and this sort of thing? So you actually have a contract. They didn't miss that point. I suspect you could break the contract, but I don't know how. Now, one person I know, he's researched it, and he says that you have to be of the land. And he claims you cannot move your sovereignty, whatever state you were born in. I don't know that I necessarily agree with that, but to tell you the truth, I've never researched the immigrant question. But I'll tell you this, if the country that you came from is a republic, then it's the same system we have here, okay? Because the very definition, which is what we're going to get into next, the very definition of a republic involves personal sovereignty, okay? So
this is very interesting because most countries in this world
are republics.
Call themselves republics.
Yes.
But I don't think Red China is a republic.
Yes, it is.
I know it is.
Mm-hmm. They're all republics. But a republic is at once the best form of government for the most freedom and the worst form of government for enslaving people. What makes it the best? Everybody's educated and knows the difference and choose to be people. What makes it the worst? The people don't know the difference and they allow themselves to be citizens and they get abused, which is what you do with citizens. They're just property. Okay? If you don't know the difference, how can you break out of the citizenship shell? So the Ayatollah Khomeini, you remember him, he chose the Republican form of government for his organization over there. Well, because those people who knew the difference, the educated populace, they knew the difference and they chose to be people. That way the laws that were passed didn't apply to them. And yet they could send their policemen out to beat up on the citizens when they felt necessary. So a republic is a wonderful form of government if everybody's educated in it. It's a terrible form of government if you're ignorant. Okay? All right, so let's see. That's basically, now let's get into the point of this. The whole reason for bringing this up is I wanted to explain to you the difference between people and citizens. And the subject, what I want to tell you tonight is why it is if you're a citizen you have no rights. And I think you kind of got an idea now from what I've told you, that a citizen doesn't have any rights because why? He's subject. He's given up all that. What he gets is privileges. When you talk about civil rights, if you really speak the language correctly, those are called civil privileges. Okay? Natural rights is what people have. Civil rights, also known as civil privileges, is what citizens have. So all these citizens running around demanding their civil rights, what are they saying? What they're saying is that certain privileges have been legislated for our benefit, or maybe for our control, and we demand that those civil rights be acknowledged. You won't catch me suing for my civil rights. I'll be suing for my natural rights. Yes.
What are civil liberties?
Same idea. Same idea. That's your civil rights, civil privileges again. It's civil. It's the civil aspect. It says it's government granted. We're not part of the government when we're people. We're above the government. Okay? Sovereignty. Scary thought, isn't it? So, let's go to the Bill of Rights here. Okay? Now, there's a book called, it's called the Constitution of the United States of America, Analysis and Interpretation. That's the full name of the book. And I've got a copy of it on this CD, so you can read it. And it's about 2,700 pages. As you can tell, there's a lot on the CD. 250,000 bytes, more than that on there, of information. And that's one of the things that I included on is the entire book. But on this here, where I went to people's rights versus citizens' rights, I extracted from that book this particular thing because I thought it was particularly interesting to our discussion here. And here it is. This book, by the way, is published by the Senate. Every senator, every congressman, and the Vice President of the United States gets a free copy when they come into office. Why doesn't the President get a copy? The reason is because he's not part of the Congress. The Vice President is the President of the Senate. That's why he gets his free copy. So they all get this. This is, you might loosely call the Book of Truth. This is, somebody's got to know how the system's put together. Somebody's got to keep this running right. So they published this book, which many congressmen don't even open. A friend of mine went up to his congressman's office over somewhere near Monrovia, I think it is. He went out, he saw it sitting on the shelf. Brand new. Brand new, never opened, never touched, except to put it on the shelf. But here we are. If you look on Senate document 99-16, which is the official designation for this book, on page 956 through 957, you look at footnote 12. Footnote 12 clarifies the text that's in there. And here's what footnote 12 says. I've kind of laid it out. On the left side, you have amendments that are available to U.S. citizens. We're talking about the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. Okay? And on the right, we have amendments not available to U.S. citizens. So, you have a privilege, actually, if I speak correct English, you have a privilege of free exercise and establishment of religion. About the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. Okay? And on the right, we have amendments not available to U.S. citizens. So, you have a privilege, actually, if I speak correct English, you have a privilege of free exercise and establishment of religion. Protection on that. You have freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of assembly, and freedom to petition the government. Those are such strong rights for people that when they converted people into citizens, they didn't dare take them away. I mean, there might be another revolution if they did. So they've granted those privileges. You have supposedly Fourth Amendment privileges. Freedom from unreasonable search and seizure. Freedom from double jeopardy, self-incrimination, and just compensation for property that they take from you. You know, eminent domain? You know, where the government says, oh, we want your property. And finally, let's see, on the Sixth and Eighth Amendments, these protections have been somewhat diluted. Speedy trial, public trial, jury trial, impartial jury, notice of charges, confrontation of witnesses, compulsory process in order to get your witnesses, and a right to counsel. They somewhat diluted it, but there it is. I believe if you are considered an enemy combatant, you don't have any right even to see an attorney. You know, that's what all those guys they captured. Yes, sir.
No, could you read that reference one more time? Where we're located?
This is on the disc, of course, and where you look at people's rights versus citizens' rights. I can go through the chain here. Okay, you're on the home page, and you go to the law notes. You click on law notes. This is when I say the home page, I'm talking about the very first page that pops up when you put the CD in your computer. So you go to law notes. In the law notes, you click on the foundation. And then in the foundation, you click on people or citizen. No, I'm sorry, Bill of Rights. You click on Bill of Rights under the foundation category. And when you click on the Bill of Rights, it brings up that page there. And there is where you have it identified as Senate Document 99-16, pages 956 and 957. Okay? So these are the privileges that citizens have or don't have. Okay? Now let's look at the privileges that citizens do not have. And by the way, these are all have a history of court determination. This book cites the cases for that support the interpretation that's being made. So let's look at these rights that you don't have. In other words, privileges that are not granted to citizens. You do not have a right to keep and bear arms. That should touch some hot points here for some people. Okay. If you're a people, you have a right. In fact, you have all rights. What are your rights? Whatever you say they are, as long as you don't hurt another one of the people, one of the sovereigns. But as a citizen, you don't have a right. Why don't you? Because you're subject. If you're subject, you got to obey the rules that you're given. Under the common law, we have one rule: don't hurt anybody. The golden rule: treat others as you'd have them treat you. You've all heard that golden rule, right? That's the Christianity. The Christian Bible is the foundation of the American system of law. Okay? And that goes back further. The Christian system of law is based on the Judaic system of law. So, regardless of your belief, our legal system was extracted from those systems. So, but you see, as a citizen,
it's all about the love.
All you have is privileges.
So we're going to have to stop cut off Bill here. And this is our show is